You are in a meeting. Someone says something you know is incorrect, factually, demonstrably wrong. You have the information, you have the evidence, you could speak, should speak, and you say nothing. Not because you are afraid of being wrong, you know you are right. But something stops you, something deeper than rationality, a sensation in your chest, a tightness, a voice that whispers, "Do not." Later, someone asks why you stayed quiet, and you say you were not sure, that maybe you misunderstood, that it was not important enough to mention. But that is not the truth. The truth is you felt it, that specific fear, the one that activates before thought, before choice, the fear that if you speak, you will be marked, remembered, separated, that the group will close around the gap where you used to stand. This is not cowardice, this is survival wiring, a mechanism so old, so fundamental that it operates beneath consciousness, an economy you did not know you entered, where the currency is conformity and the price of transaction is silence. And the cost of refusing to pay is abandonment. Welcome to the abandonment economy, where exclusion is the thread that governs everything, and most people spend their entire lives obeying rules they have never seen written. The question is not whether you participate. You do. Everyone does. The question is, what are you paying? And what happens when you realize the price is due? Today we investigate the abandonment economy, the psychological mechanism where fear of social exclusion functions as the primary driver of obedience and conformity. We examine how this ancient survival system operates in modern life, why the need to belong ranks among the most fundamental human motivations, and what happens when the terror of being cast out becomes stronger than the desire to be honest. This exploration draws on research into ostracism, conformity studies, the neuroscience of social pain, and the psychology of group dynamics. What emerges is unsettling, because social exclusion activates the same neural regions as physical pain, creating a threat response so powerful that it can override ethics, logic, and personal truth. The abandonment economy is not a metaphor, it is a functioning system, one where 76% of people will deny observable reality rather than stand alone against group consensus, where the fear of being too much, too different, too visible triggers automatic self-erasure, and it learned this before you had words. As you read this, notice something. When you imagine disagreeing with a group of people you respect, not on something trivial but on something that matters to you, what happens in your body? Does your throat tighten? Does your heart rate increase? Do you immediately begin calculating how to phrase it, soften it, make it more palatable? Do you feel the impulse to just not say it at all? And it activates before you have a chance to think. That response is not weakness, it is the system operating exactly as designed, protecting you from the oldest threat humans ever faced. Not death, exile. If your chest tightened just now, that matters. That response is the system, and ostracism episodes as brief as 2 minutes result in psychological pain responses, need threat, and emotional distress. Most people spend their lives managing this system without even realizing it exists. From an evolutionary perspective, humans have always been inherently social creatures. Survival depended on group cohesion and cooperation. This is not philosophy, this is biology. For the vast majority of human history, being separated from the group meant death, not metaphorical death, actual death. No access to food, no protection from predators, no defense against other groups. No one to care for you when injured or ill. Evolutionary psychologists believe that being part of a group was essential for accessing resources such as food, protection from predators and other people, and finding a mate. So the brain developed an alarm system, one that would activate at the first sign of potential exclusion, one that would create pain intense enough to force behavioral correction. Research has shown that the brain processes social pain similarly to physical pain. Areas activated during physical injury, such as the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, are also engaged when individuals experience social exclusion. This is why rejection does not feel like disappointment, it feels like injury. Because to your nervous system it is. Think about what this means. Your brain cannot distinguish between social rejection and physical threat. The neural overlap suggests that brains interpret social rejection similarly to experiencing physical injury, with intense discomfort. The same regions that light up when you touch a hot stove activate when someone excludes you from a group. This system saved lives for hundreds of thousands of years. It kept people connected, cooperative, careful not to violate group norms, because violation meant expulsion, and expulsion meant death. And the body does not forget. It does not argue. It reacts. The problem is that the environment changed. Modern humans are not exiled to die alone on the savannah when they disagree in a meeting. But the alarm system does not know that. It still operates on ancient logic. Group rejection equals death. Therefore, avoid group rejection at all costs. Baumeister and Leary propose that humans have a pervasive drive to form and maintain at least a minimum quantity of lasting positive and significant interpersonal relationships. This is not a preference, it is a need, fundamental as hunger or thirst. And once this pattern is learned, it does not stay in childhood. Children learn the abandonment economy early, through the silence that follows certain statements, through the subtle shift when they say the wrong thing, through being picked last, left out, whispered about, through the emotional withdrawal of caregivers when behavior was unacceptable. They learn. Certain expressions of self result in distance. Other expressions result in closeness, and closeness is survival. So they begin to edit, to monitor, to scan every interaction for signs of potential rejection. When individuals observe others being rejected, they experience the psychological pain of ostracism and may withdraw from social interactions to avoid future exclusion. Even witnessing someone else being excluded activates the threat system. This creates hypervigilance, a constant background scan. Am I safe? Am I included? Am I at risk? The sociometer theory suggests that self-esteem is an internal monitor or gauge of an individual's social acceptance and belongingness. Your sense of worth fluctuates based on perceived social acceptance, not because you are shallow, but because your brain is using self-esteem as a measurement tool, a gauge of relational value. When self-esteem drops, it is not just emotional, it is informational. The system is telling you you are at risk of exclusion. Adjust your behavior, and most people obey without question, because the alternative, being cast out, activates a terror so primal that consciousness barely registers it. You just feel the need to fix it, to apologize, to conform, to disappear whatever part of you caused the disturbance. This is the contract. Behave acceptably, remain included, deviate, face exile. And when you do face it, long-term consequences of experiencing ostracism can result in alienation, depression, helplessness, and feelings of unworthiness. The system is elegant, and it is merciless. In Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments, 76% of participants conformed to group pressure at least once by indicating an obviously incorrect answer. These were not weak people. They were not unintelligent. They could see the correct answer clearly. But when surrounded by people confidently giving the wrong answer, something happened. Researchers categorized the motivation to conform into two types: Normative social influence. People conform to fit in, feel good, and be accepted by the group. And informational social influence. People conform because they believe the group is competent. In Asch's experiment, the answer was obvious. There was no ambiguity. So, the conformity was not informational, it was normative. People gave wrong answers not because they thought the group was right, but because they could not bear to stand alone. When interviewed afterward, participants reported knowing the correct answer, but the pressure to agree was overwhelming. The fear of being the only one to disagree created such distress that denying reality felt safer than facing social judgment. This is the conformity reflex, an automatic response to group pressure. Conformity influences the formation and maintenance of social norms and helps societies function smoothly via the self-elimination of behaviors seen as contrary to unwritten rules. It is not always conscious. Often, it happens before you realize a choice was made. Someone makes a joke you find offensive. Everyone laughs, you laugh too. Not because it was funny, because not laughing would mark you as other, as someone who does not belong. Someone states an opinion you disagree with. Several people nod, you nod too, or you stay silent, because disagreeing would create tension, would make you visible, would risk separation. Each individual member of the group experiences a personal reluctance to disagree. Through self-censorship and mind guarding, the group develops an atmosphere of unanimity. This is self-censorship, the act of withholding information intentionally and voluntarily despite having no formal obstacle preventing you from sharing it. You have the information, you have the right to speak, but you choose silence, not because of external force, because of internal calculation. The calculation is simple. Will saying this decrease my relational value? Will it make me less accepted? If yes, do not say it. Groupthink develops when each person privately disagrees with what is occurring, yet publicly everyone expresses total agreement with the group's policies. Everyone in the room may think the decision is wrong, but no one speaks, because each person believes they are the only one who disagrees, and being the only one who disagrees is too dangerous. From the outside, this looks like agreement. From the inside, it feels like suffocation. The abandonment economy thrives on this mechanism, because conformity is cheap to enforce. The group does not need to threaten, it only needs to exist. The presence of another dissenter drops conformity rates dramatically. If at least one person disagrees, conformity rates drops to near zero. But when everyone appears to agree, the pressure becomes unbearable, and the cost of breaking it feels too high. Most people never call this fear, they just call it being agreeable, being a team player, not making waves. What if the fear is not about the disagreement, but about the isolation that follows? Humans have a deep-seated need to be liked, respected and accepted. Sometimes that need is so strong it drives people to alter their behaviors in exchange for approval. This creates a trap, a choice that feels impossible. You can be authentic or you can belong, but often you cannot have both. Because authenticity requires showing parts of yourself that may not be acceptable, parts that are too intense, too different, too opinionated, too much. And in the context of workplace diversity and inclusion, belonging refers to an individual's sense of being accepted and valued for their authentic self, rather than needing to conform or hide aspects of their identity. But through belonging, acceptance of the authentic self is rare. More common is conditional acceptance. You are welcome here as long as you are like us, as long as you do not disrupt, as long as you stay small enough to fit. To experience belonging, you must be able to reveal your authentic self. And when you feel safe to be your authentic self, this is when you experience the greatest belonging. But most environments do not create that safety. They create the opposite, a pressure to perform, a version of yourself that is palatable, acceptable, non-threatening. So people split. They develop different selves for different contexts. Work you, family you, friend group you, social media you. By the time you get home, you are exhausted from performing so many versions of yourself that you have forgotten which one is real. This is not strategic, this is protective. The brain learns. In this environment, this part of me is acceptable. In that environment, that part is safe. And it edits in real time, suppressing whatever might trigger rejection. To be accepted within a group, individuals may convey or conceal certain parts of their personalities. This is known as self-presentation, and self-presentation becomes automatic. You do not decide to hide, you just do. The system operates beneath awareness, trimming away anything that might cause separation. But there is a cost. Self-censorship contains a paradox. We censor ourselves to fit in with the group, but at the same time we feel more and more misunderstood and isolated in that group. You are surrounded by people, but you are alone, because the version of you they accept is not the version that actually exists, and the version that actually exists cannot be shown without risking exile. This is the authenticity trap. Be yourself and lose belonging. Conform and lose yourself. Most people choose conformity, not because they want to, because the pain of isolation is more immediate than the pain of self-betrayal. Self-betrayal is chronic, dull, easy to ignore. Isolation is acute, sharp, impossible to dismiss. Belonging versus truth is not really a choice. It is a ransom you pay to avoid abandonment. And here is what makes this particularly insidious. The parts you hide to maintain belonging are often the parts that make you valuable. The dissenting opinion that could have prevented disaster. The creative idea that did not fit the template. The honesty that could have deepened connection. Research shows that feeling authentic is associated with greater well-being and can buffer the pain of social rejection. But achieving authenticity requires risking the very rejection it protests against, a paradox with no clean resolution. You cannot know if authenticity will be accepted until you risk it, and risking it means potentially triggering the abandonment alarm. So most people never risk it. They calculate in advance. They edit preemptively. They ensure that what is shown is safe. And they call this maturity, professionalism, getting along. But it is not maturity. It is management of a threat system that cannot distinguish between social discomfort and mortal danger. There is a particular kind of loneliness that accompanies success. Success often brings unique challenges, and one of the most common experiences among high achievers is a sense of isolation, feeling disconnected, misunderstood, or unable to fully trust those around them. This is not about humility or gratitude. This is about what happens when you rise, when you achieve, when you become visible in ways that separate you from the group. Because success violates the abandonment economy's primary rule: do not stand out. When you achieve a high level of success, it can be difficult to connect with others on the same level. Your experiences and challenges are vastly different from those of most people, and it might feel isolating. The higher you climb, the fewer people remain at your level, and the group you left behind sometimes cannot forgive you for leaving. Predictable pain feels safer than uncertain relief. This is not about them being envious, though sometimes they are. It is about the group structure being disrupted. Social identity theory explains how individuals define themselves based on group memberships. When one person attempts to exit their role, the system destabilizes. Your success implies that escape was possible, and that implication threatens everyone who stayed. So they create distance, not always consciously, but the warmth changes. The invitations stop. The conversations become strained. Success can create distance from others, sometimes due to jealousy or the assumption that highly successful people do not need support. And you face a choice: Return to the group by diminishing yourself, prove you have not changed, make yourself small again, or accept the isolation that comes with growth. Most people oscillate, they achieve, then self-sabotage, rise, then retreat. Not because they lack discipline, but because the nervous system cannot tolerate prolonged separation from the tribe. The traits that make people successful, determination, ambition, and independence, do not always foster close relationships, and the time spent pursuing goals means less time for friends and family. But it is more than time scarcity, it is a structural incompatibility between achievement and belonging. To achieve, you must differentiate. To belong, you must conform. These are opposing forces, and when they collide, the abandonment alarm activates. Success can make it challenging to express vulnerability. The fear of appearing weak or imperfect in the eyes of others may lead individuals to internalize their struggles. So successful people often hide their difficulties, not because they are proud, but because admitting a struggle might confirm what they fear, that they do not deserve the success, that they are impostors who will be discovered and exiled. The patterns vary. Some people create chaos that drains their achievements. Some develop health crises that force retreat. Some make decisions that guarantee they will not rise too far above the group they came from. The specifics differ, but the function is identical. Restore proximity to the tribe. Prove you are still one of them. Confirm you have not become the person who lives. Because if you are not that person anymore, who are you? And if you do not belong back there anymore, where do you belong? These are not achievement questions, they are attachment questions, and attachment questions do not resolve through success metrics, they resolve through redefining what tribe means. There is a specific kind of editing that happens when you have been told you are too much, too loud, too intense, too emotional, too opinionated, too honest, too anything that makes others uncomfortable. People high in rejection sensitivity experience deep anxiety and humiliation at the slightest rebuff and often misinterpret benign or mildly negative social cues as signs of outright rejection. But this is not paranoia, this is pattern recognition. The brain has learned, when I am fully myself, people withdraw. So a system develops. Rejection sensitivity is characterized by anxiously expecting, readily perceiving, and overreacting to social rejection. You begin to monitor yourself constantly, dimming the parts that seem to trigger distance, amplifying the parts that elicit acceptance. But here is the trap. The more you dim yourself, the less connected you feel. People with low self-esteem who are more timid and self-censoring tend to experience fewer positive emotions, because the connection is not to you, it is to the performance. And deep down you know this, which creates a particular kind of loneliness, surrounded by people who like a version of you that does not exist, alone in the truth of who you actually are. Rejection-sensitive dysphoria describes overwhelming reactions to perceived rejection. Even if no one actually said or did anything cruel, a passing comment can trigger feelings of shame, embarrassment, or self-doubt. For people operating in this state, every interaction becomes a minefield. Every pause in conversation could signal rejection. Every facial expression could mean disapproval. This is exhausting. People with rejection sensitivity experience activation in specific brain regions when looking at faces displaying disapproval. The threat system is constantly activated. The body is always preparing for exile. So they become smaller, quieter, more agreeable. They learn to read rooms, adjust rapidly, become whoever is needed in the moment. Paradoxically, such behavior may actually push others away, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. That confusion is part of the bind, because the very adaptations meant to prevent rejection often create it. People sense the performance, they feel the inauthenticity, and they withdraw, not because the authentic self was too much, but because the performance self was too hollow. This creates a cruel loop. You hide to prevent rejection. The hiding creates distance. The distance feels like rejection, so you hide more. And the cycle continues until you have disappeared entirely into what others can tolerate. People often go through life feeling more rejected than they actually are, misinterpreting neutral feedback from others as negative. The abandonment economy teaches you to see threat everywhere, to interpret silence as disapproval, neutrality as rejection, anything less than enthusiasm as evidence you are too much. And you begin to believe it, that the problem is you, that if you were different, less intense, more normal, easier to be around, you would not trigger the response. But the problem is not you. The problem is a system that demands conformity and calls it connection, that requires you to be less so others can be comfortable, that treats authenticity as a violation requiring correction. If arguments about your personality feel like arguments about your right to exist, you already understand this system. At some point, if you pay attention, you notice the pattern. You notice that every time you are fully yourself, something shifts. People become uncomfortable, distance appears, and you feel the pull to apologize, to explain, to make yourself smaller again. And you begin to ask, is this really about being too much, or is it about a system that requires people to be less than whole in order to belong? Recognizing the abandonment economy does not dissolve it, but it changes something, because once you see the mechanism, you cannot unsee it. You cannot pretend the editing is natural. You cannot pretend the fear is irrational. You begin to understand that the threat is real, but the source is not where you thought. The threat is not exile itself. The threat is spending your entire life paying tribute to a system that demands you abandon yourself to avoid being abandoned by others. And you realize the bind is real. The fear is real, but the law is not. Not because you changed, but because the system is exposed. The abandonment economy exists in your nervous system, not in reality, and nervous systems can learn new patterns slowly, with difficulty, but very possible. Some people, when they recognize the system, make a decision, not to reject all belonging, not to become isolated, but to stop paying the price, to stop editing preemptively, to stop shrinking to fit spaces that were never built for their shape. This is not about becoming difficult or defiant. It is about clarification, clarifying that belonging achieved through self-betrayal is not belonging, it is captivity, and the cost of staying captive eventually exceeds the fear of being free. Seeing the price tag is already an act of resistance. But resistance in this context is not rebellion, it is recognition, recognizing that you have been operating in an economy where the currency was your authenticity and the interest rate was impossibly high, where you paid and paid and paid and the debt never decreased, and that some debts are not meant to be paid, they are meant to be refused, not because the fear of exclusion disappears, but because you become willing to risk it, to discover what happens when you stop managing the threat and start living despite it. This does not mean recklessness, it means selectivity, choosing which groups are worth adjusting for, which relationships can hold your full presence, which spaces have earned access for your truth, and accepting that some people will not be able to stay, not because you did something wrong, but because the version of you they needed no longer exists, and the version that does exist does not fit the role you were assigned. This is differentiation, the process of becoming separate enough to be yourself while remaining connected to those who can hold you. And differentiation requires mourning the belonging you thought you had, mourning the unconditional acceptance that was always conditional, mourning the fantasy that you could be fully yourself and never face rejection. These losses are real, the grief is valid, but on the other side of the grief is something the abandonment economy never offers, the possibility of genuine connection, not to a performance, but to you. You were taught to fear exclusion more than self-loss, to value belonging more than honesty, to believe that who you are, unedited, unmanaged, and deemed, is too much for others to handle. And you internalized that teaching. You made it part of your nervous system, part of how you navigate the world, part of what feels safe and what feels dangerous. The abandonment economy is real. The way it operates in your body is real. Ostracism and social exclusion signal threats that produce pain responses and emotional distress. The fear it produces is legitimate, but the law it enforces is not universal. It is conditional on staying small enough to remain invisible. What if exclusion is not the worst thing that can happen to you? Not forever, just long enough to see clearly. What if the fear is protecting you from something that is not actually a threat anymore? What if the people you are afraid of losing were never really with you? They were with the version you performed? What if the only person still enforcing the old rules is you? The abandonment economy does not dissolve easily. It does not respond to logic or reassurance. It responds to repeated evidence that being yourself does not destroy you, that showing up authentically does not result in the death your nervous system fears, that connection is still possible, different, smaller perhaps, but real, when you stop trading yourself for acceptance. But that evidence requires time, and it requires you to stop editing long enough for authenticity to stabilize, long enough for your system to register this is not temporary, this is not a mistake, this is real. And real means you have to decide, do you want to stay in the economy or do you want to live outside of it? Only one is yours. If this landed, if you recognize the tightness when groups pressure you to agree, the fear when authenticity threatens belonging, the exhaustion of performing versions of yourself that fit, there is more here. Like this and subscribe if you are beginning to understand that the fear is not about being too much, it is about living in a system that requires you to be less. Trading yourself for belonging is the transaction. The economy is not real, but the cost of participating is.